beginning of the end, people. We're officially in the final home stretch. Only 23 episodes left to go as we begin arguably the biggest and, like, some say baddest season of this show to date. Season 6. That's right. We've made it. It's the infamous season that builds to battle the bastards in Winds of Winter. Pat, you looking forward to covering this season?
Listen, I think the Talkin TV family that's here, Talkin Thrones with us, will agree that the Red Woman, it's the reveal that no one asked for, but the one we deserved.
That's the best joke you've made in a while. All of that and more on tonight's episode of Talkin Thrones. Pat, we're here. We've made it. Season 6 premiere. Season 6, episode 1, The Red Wedding. This is it. This is the big one. We're on the home stretch. Like I said, it's this season and then the next two, the shorter seasons. And then that is it. So season 6, this is an interesting beast. It aired in 2016, which is arguably kind of the beginning of the shift towards the streaming era of television, right? This is what we've been talking about the last couple of weeks, really leading up to this point, right? The fact that Game of Thrones happens right on the transition point from peak prestige TV to streaming TV. And this is it. This is kind of where it takes place. And in a strange way, Game of Thrones was kind of almost able to benefit off of that, I feel like, in a strange way. In addition, this is also the first season where we're officially past the books. Season 5 primarily wraps up a majority of the events that happened across the last 2 books in the series, Feast for Crows and Dance with Dragons. And although George R.R. Martin had provided Benioff and Weiss with outlines for his next 2 books, The Winds of Winter and A Dream of Spring, The Winds of Winter still has not been released to this day, a full whopping 11 years after the release of the last book, A Dance of Dragons. And what erupts here is, I think, probably the most fascinating creation in the show history so far, especially given, obviously the benefit of hindsight, what we know about what's to come, especially. So I guess my first question for you, Pat, before we start this podcast is, with the knowledge of the last 2 seasons going in, how are your thoughts on season 6, just for the most part?
Oh, man. Listen, this is like going to be the 3rd time that I watched it, as we do this run of the podcast through season 6. And, I remember being like, thank God this show has picked back up after season 5.
Yeah.
So
I remember I had similar thoughts.
Yeah, it's one of those things where, my last watch through before, agreeing to do this, it was basically season 6, 7, and I didn't make it all the way through 8. I still I made it to the the battle at Winterfell, and then I gave up again. But
well, at least the difference there is that you only had 3 more episodes to go after that, as opposed to
well, I think that's sort of the end of the show, right? When the Night King is done, it just wraps up. That's the natural point for me to stop. But I felt like from season 6 to that point, I was totally vested, and we'll see if that holds water as we continue to talk about these episodes.
Well, the biggest thing for me that I remember in kind of the post-book era of the show is that season 7, I feel like, is where the criticisms started to begin, but it wasn't. But even at that point, we still weren't in like, oh shit, we're in trouble territory. We really didn't hit that until 2 years later when we got the final season in 2019. And I feel like a majority of that is because you're 100% right. At the time, this season picked up after, I think a lot of people were not in very much disagreement with us when we said that season 5 was a very lackluster season in comparison to the previous couple of seasons that we'd had. And season 6, despite the fact that they had surpassed the books, it seemed like a return to form. It seemed like, we were back. It seemed like things were back on a breakneck pace with, that tension, that great writing that had been missing from the last couple seasons, from the last season, rather, I should say. It felt like it was back, and it felt like it was really picking up steam and momentum. And it all capped off with arguably, again, the biggest spectacle sequence that had really ever, the best feat of technical filmmaking that I'd probably ever been seen in the television space with the airing of the Battle of the Bastards. Roughly, I think right now, we're what, at the end of May right now? So I think we're roughly just about hit like the 6-year anniversary since the premiere of Battle of the Bastards. And like I said, all of that starts here, and all of that definitely signifies, although once again, I do still stand by my statement that the writing was never as strong as it was in those first couple of seasons, just because of how tight and gripping the story beats were, and just how well thought out and well matured and how fleshed out each of those characters' arcs. We still don't really have that, but I feel like what we have in its place is definitely what's the word I'm looking for?
No, I'm sorry. You're talking about the writing.
A lot of glowing reviews here, but I'm doing my best.
You're talking about the writing, and immediately my mind jumps to what took place in Dorne this episode, and I'm just thinking to myself, I'm like,
get that over with now. I obviously was going to start.
Yeah, well, we might as well, because it's related to writing, right? Because that's been our gripe for a little bit of time, during the 5th season, and it's going to extend here into the 6th season a little bit. And with Dorne, it's essentially the undoing of the storyline. We just decide that, why not just end, what's his face, the king's,
Prince Doran,
Prince Doran's, storyline, in this weird sort of like, I don't even know how to describe it. It's basically Doran has one loyal soldier in all his kingdom,
and he's not even a soldier; he's a messenger.
Exactly, and they just stab him in the back, and then all the other troops are like, "Yeah, we're good with this."
That's not even the most unrealistic part to me. The most unrealistic part for me is the little girl just takes the one knife and stabs and takes out that giant bodyguard, and boom, he's out with one shot.
Well, that's what I'm saying. The bodyguard is the one ally that he has.
Oh, the bodyguard.
Like everybody else is standing there, like, "Yeah, we're down with this."
Well, they literally killed the messenger, so.
Yeah, well, I don't know. The whole thing is
it's terrible.
If you're gonna have a civil war, that would have been a cool
kind of plot. But they
theme
were like,
to have throughout season 6.
Bran. But they were like, "Look, we're bringing back Bran this season. We got to get this. Nobody liked this storyline. We got to get this shit out of here." And
exactly.
I hate
I hate the way you put it, but the fact is, like, they just wanted to brush it under the rug,
and get it out of the way.
It had the most promise in season 4. And then season 5, they squandered it. In season 6, they basically just said, "Hey, let's put this, let's put this one in the back of the fridge. Maybe mold grows on it. Maybe it doesn't. Who knows?"
Yeah, it's bad. This is the only only bad part. It's season 5 coming back with a vengeance. It's like one last little more. It's almost like Skeletor coming out at the end of He-Man and being like, "I'll be back for one more." And then thank God we never got the sequel to that He-Man. Maybe the Game of Thrones writer should have taken notes right there. Yeah, it's stupid.
Masters of the Universe reference was not what I was expecting tonight.
Hey man, look, we've already shown that on this show, you never know what kind of a reference you're gonna get, And yeah, this storyline, it's bad, it's stupid, it's somehow it's dumber than any of the dumb stuff that we got in season 5, and that was already bad enough to begin with. It's so beyond obviously an instance of the writers just wanted to be done with this storyline. I'm not even going to go into the details about justifies or how it doesn't justify Elia Martell's thought process towards Prince Doran and everything, but it just is the definition of let's get this shit out of the way. And what's even more insulting is it would have been one thing if they had just stayed in Doran and just never come. And no, they go the extra mile. They go and they even kill off the son in the most brutally and stupidest way possible, where he's going to walk.
I forgot about that sequence.
I was dying laughing where he's going to go.
Just who's it going to be? Which sister is it?
Not it. The fact that he goes in between them, he moves in between them, he's literally just leaving the space wide open. I just want to know what the direction was for that scene where they're like, "Okay, you're gonna go and you're gonna stand right in between them." The actor could have had to have been like, "Look, she's got a spear. She can just stick me through the back of the head," and that's exactly what happened. So
yeah, listen, it's one of those things. I guess in Dorne they don't actually require you to go to combat school.
Clearly, just given how terrible that choreography was.
That doesn't even make any sense because they're supposed to be the most fearless warriors.
Over it? Exactly. How does that explain over? I don't know. Look, the less said about this, the better. We got it out of the way. It's done. We don't have to talk about it again until the end.
It's one of those things where
we're done with Dorne.
They just give up on Dorne 100%. They tap out and they bring it back just because it exists, but they immediately sort of just wash over it, in the later seasons as well. It's, she's backing Daenerys, but Cersei's got, them imprisoned.
And
it's
then the
just one final
die, and then there's some other random ruler of Dorne in the last episode because I guess we still got to include Dorne in this.
It's one final sadistic win for Cersei. Is the only thing left for the Dorne storyline, right? In reality,
that's literally it. Well, it does provide for a good moment in season 7. I will say that at the very least. I do think
it's great, but you got to earn these moments,
Yeah.
right? And that would
You're right.
mean having some sort of Dorne storyline in season 6. If it was sort of some sort of civil war, and you have Dr. Bashir going at it, and he gets
You're never gonna call him by his actual character name. I love it.
Whatever, Duran. But if you had
I
some,
love it. He's Dr. Bashir. Just keep him Dr.
if
Bashir.
you have some time to develop that storyline, it would have made for a better payoff in the later season.
100%. But alas, that is what we got. So unfortunately, that is what we have to say. But we're done with Dorne. It's over with. We don't have to talk about it until the last episode when Varys unfortunately brings it back into the story. Let's talk about the majority of the focus of this death. It's the opening scene. It's what I love. Like, I was worried that when, because obviously, again, the big thing that this episode has to answer, obviously, is what happens immediately after Jon's death. And at least for this episode, they were running with and really holding and sticking true to the idea of, yeah, Jon's dead. So it opens up. I love the tracking shot that they do all over the castle. Zooms in right on Jon's body, right as Davos hears the wolf howling, comes out, they bring the body inside.
And Davos goes up to the banner. He's like, "Oh, that's kind of odd."
Yeah, right. Like, that's weird.
Seeing Jon just laying there,
dead body just lying out in the ground. That's the other problem too. Again, that's another problem why their plan was stupid. It's like they just left the body there. Like someone was gonna find.
Well,
them,
yeah, the whole point is to see the traitor sign and so intimidation, or it's like you got to choose one side or the other. So I get the reason why they left the body there. My favorite part is like all the supporters of Jon come out at that moment.
They all come out at once. It's like they all know.
Yeah.
It's like they've all got
and Davos
attachment to him.
And Davos is delivering traffic. He's like, "You got to help me." And Davos doesn't actually do anything. He just lets everybody else pick Jon up and bring him to the room.
He's been Stannis' hand for the last couple of years, all right? He's used to underlings, doing what he wants. Plus, he's
I
a
guess,
little older, so I'm chalking that one up to him, just like chalking it up to age. No, but what I will say,
he's a natural leader
exactly,
in this circumstance.
He is a natural leader. Yeah, this is the thing that I like is this season. I think is much more so Davos coming into his own, because the one thing I will say is that obviously, once we know that inevitably Jon comes back to life, it feels like the two biggest factors behind it, the things that are really backing him and giving him like a lot of support, are Sansa and Davos. And this is Davos's moment. Davos really coming to play. He's been playing second fiddle to Stannis for the last couple of years, even though he's been Stannis' voice. And now that Stannis is gone, he ultimately is able to find a new leadership in Jon. And the thing that I will say is I do like how the relationship develops between Jon and Davos and how it's established here. The other thing I like too about the sequence is just how fast paced it is. They're like, yeah, this is urgent. They're like, fuck, like we realize, so now this happened, Jon's dead, and Davos is already, and they're already talking about like, yeah, we got to figure out about how this is going to blow back on us. And Ed's like, oh, we're going to kill every last traitor in the castle. And Davos is like, take a step back there. Let's think this through here.
Yeah, Davos, hey, he's the one consistent character throughout the entire series. And, he's my personal favorite. I imagine that he's a fan favorite across
he's top 5 for me.
The board. He's just someone that always has the right wit, no matter what the situation is. And it's not forced. It's obviously a character that's like too smart for his own good, but every time they bring it out, it's well placed and it seems to play well in the show. So, I think Davos is consistent, from start to finish when he's introduced all the way to, the final moments of the series. And, it's just one of those characters that you love to see on the screen. And in this case, he takes charge, of the members of the Night's Watch that are clearly going to be cleaned out. There's no way that these loyal Jon supporters are going to be brought back into the fold. It's only a matter of time before, Alistair decides to do whatever he's going to do with them. And it creates this nice situation where Davos and the group of, Jon supporters are locked in a room with the body, and basically they are going to get into that room no matter what. And,
really good bottle tension there. Really good bottle tension. I will say that. Like this, like that's the biggest thing about this episode is this episode does an excellent job of reestablishing like this tension by having this like one looming event of, okay, what's going to happen to the rest of these guys that ultimately have to choose between a dead man and the rest of their so-called brothers, that ultimately want to, and the rest of their so-called brothers. It's a tough choice. And like, I'm glad that Benioff and Weiss, even in the post Martin, defined era, in the post-source material era, are still able to come up with and conceive of good, interesting moments like that. So famously, this is the first season where somebody other than Peter Dinklage was nominated in the Best Supporting Actor category. So far up to this point, Peter Dinklage, Lena Headey, and Emilia Clarke were the only ones that had been nominated for the show. So this was the year that also the first year famously that Kit Harington was nominated, long overdue. for his supporting actor Emmy. And if you ask me, this to me is the only season where Peter Dinklage does not deserve the Emmy. Peter Dinklage, as you know, has always been my favorite actor on the show. Season 6, he does not deserve it 100%. We'll get to that later when we get to his performance. And I think in his spot, Liam Cunningham should have been nominated because you're right. He's 100% consistent across the board as Davos. He gives probably one of the best performances of the entire show, even once the show goes completely off the rails. And this season for me is his absolute apex. So he deserves 100% Emmy here, mostly for the line that he gives for Alliser later on when they come to the door and he's like, you're free, you're free to go south later. We'll ride you a horse. He's like, I had some mutton. He's like, what? He's like, I don't expect we're gonna make it far south without some food. I like some mutton. I love that they're able to still see those one-liners in there.
He says he's not a good hunter and he'll need some food.
And he'll need some food, yeah. Well, there are a couple of contradictions that end up coming up here, but I'll get to those later. But also the other thing that I will say is who else deserved an Emmy? Friggin' Owen Teal is Sir Alliser Thorne. He's only in 3 episodes this season. This is obviously his send-off season. And I gotta say, bravo to the speech that he gives. Like, once again, showing bringing back the moral gray area that we love so much about early Game of Thrones. Bringing back the multiple layers where even though we know he even makes it clear that he hated Jon's guts from minute 1, he also admits that in part, despite how pig-headed the decision was in hindsight, he was doing this in some sense for the watch. And
well, I think the best part about the speech is the idea that Jon let the wildlings through. He gave them the lands that they sort of pillaged and assaulted people
Essentially, he uses the idea of Jon spitting in the face of the legacy and the hard work and the whole idea of the Night's Watch.
He was destroying the ideal of the Night's Watch, and he put us in this position, and we had to do what we had to do. And, it's one of those things where it's a great speech because you have to understand, he's a very cunning leader, and he knows how to, control men. And the fact is he needs to solidify his power. And Davos even makes mention to this when they're in the other room. It's basically like he's probably done it by now, cemented the power. And, it's a really well-crafted sequence because it shows us how Alistair is really, getting the lesser of the Night's Watch to rally behind his cause and really sort of go along and agree with what he did to Jon. And Davos sort of understands how a power play like this happens. And so he's sort of giving his advice, to the other Night's Watch that are, strict Jon Snow supporters. And he's really going to help them out of the scenario. If it wasn't for Davos being there, basically they would have all died. But, Davos tells them hey, the wildlings are on your side. So you better go get them here to help you out. And so there's a whole plot, that's unfolding. Tensions are going to brew between these two sides. And the question is, can they hold out, in the room with Jon's body by the time the wildlings come and support them, and bring reinforcements.
100%.
And I think it's really great tension that's brought up here in the first episode of the season.
100%. Again, the tension here, amazingly well established. Agree with you on all your points. That only brings us to the only point left at the wall before we get to the other storylines that this episode sets up. The Melisandre reveal.
How it ends the episode.
It ends the episode. Again, it's meant to be the signifying moment. It's kind of hammering home the obvious point. It's okay, just in case you didn't think that Jon was coming back from the dead, and it once again, just like the Cersei Walk of Penance in the last episode that we covered, the season 5 finale, it is once again a moment that felt really kind of important in the moment, and then just with how they treated it in hindsight, it's was this really necessary?
Basically it's hey, here's the reveal that we're never going to mention again.
Yeah, we're never going to mention again. It's just there.
The main thing is
big flaw that I have with this season as well is their usage of the Red Priestess, because as we know, this is also the season where Tyrion brings in the Red Priestess in order to start spreading the good word of Daenerys around Meereen. And what comes of that aside from establishing that Varys hates sorcery, something that we already knew? So that just factors into a whole other problem that happens there, where it's we're starting to get into more of the interest and introspective of the sorcerers before all that is just completely abandoned in the last 2 seasons.
Yeah, well, I think you're moving in this direction of magic, right? Because it's coming down to the Night King, it's coming down to Daenerys, it's coming down to Cersei, and so you're still, now that Stannis is gone, the main sort of storyline for the God of Light, you're sort of showing us that it still exists, and maybe it's a little bit bigger than Stannis, and I think that's the direction they were going in. But I think you're right. Obviously, at some point, the storyline kind of wraps up, and there's only a few pockets, right? Melisandre kind of like meanders around, and then she comes back and says, "The hell with it! I'll light your swords up," right? And that's sort of the end of that storyline. So, I would be curious as we watch the next couple seasons to really track where this, God of Light storyline goes and see where it kind of stumbles, because you're right. I don't think I really remember it having a major impact on the end. There's obviously, those band of brothers, the ones that are traveling
the Brotherhood
around.
without banners. Yeah.
There we
Who
go.
also come back this season too.
Yeah. So you have them, you have Melisandre, you have what's going on in Meereen. And, it's like, how is it going to actually impact the storyline?
Right.
And it'll be interesting to track that, because it is very minimal.
Yeah, that's the one instance where I do think it was Benioff and Weiss that really screwed that one up, because, again, it is very clear by reading the books that, like, right before this, that Martin is set up for there to be a whole lot more sorcery that's going to come into play. And there are hints at it this season, but it never feels properly utilized, especially given that they said that they were very clear about after this season. We know now in hindsight that this was also around the time that they were started to go into negotiations and deals with Disney and Netflix in order to try and figure out what their future was after the show. And they're already in the mindset of, okay, this is the wrap up. We're only doing we're only doing 13 episodes left after this season. It's going to be split into 2 parts, and there's going to be 2 years in between them. So, like, they were very much in wrap up phase. And so that's the thing that, once again, ultimately hurts this storyline like so many others.
It's one of those things where the God of Light, the Children of the Forest, the all these things like Bran and the Three-Eyed Raven, all that kind of magical stuff really gets minimized in the last couple seasons, because you're just waiting for the build, right? The entire series. And then we get towards the end and the payoff is not really there. We get to see Bran time traveling a little bit, and seeing some of those scenes that he can kind of whisper to people, and you have the whole Odor thing, but the fact is, like, the magic just never really comes to the forefront. It's like it's kind of a big letdown in the series, to be honest with you, because I expected a lot more. I expected it to have a major impact with the final season, and they sort of just again don't really do the maximum of what they could do with these storylines.
100%. Yeah. So speaking of the other storylines, let's get to the other ones. First of all,
I will say this. The last thing is, like, obviously, Melisandre is made out to be this beautiful witch. She takes the jewel off, and then it turns out, she's like 100 years old or 200, whatever the case may be. And somehow the jewel is what's magically keeping her young and fit and all that stuff. And, it just makes me think, the dragon scale doll that Stannis bought for his daughter, did he have this sort of age-defying jewel in his cart as well, and Melisandre got the better deal out of it? No, I'm just saying, like, this magic merchant that sells you either cursed items or beneficial age reduction.
Well, also keep in mind too that also that jewel is also worn by one of the other Red Priestesses that pops up later on this season, so it may be a thing that's exclusive to the Red Priestess religion rather than that little
we'll never know.
We'll never know,
unless there's like a
because the show didn't feel like telling us. So moving on to the other storyline. So Winterfell, obviously, a couple things here that are being established. Ramsay minimally used this season. Obviously, we know this is building up to his tragic defeat and death at the end of this season. He obviously is mourning over Miranda. I love the end line that he says where he has this little speech where he's commemorating her, and then the maester asks him about her, and he's like, "It's good meat. Feed her to the hounds." And he kind of moves on.
Yeah. Do you want a burial or a pyre? And it's like, good meat. Feed it to the hounds. I think that was perfectly placed for Ramsay, because remember, he's just the most awful human
exactly
ever.
And it sums up his relationship with Miranda perfectly, because he even said it is like, she was the only one that really truly understood me. And it's like, just given how savage they were with each other, it makes sense. You also have a little bit of an interaction with Roose. Again, they're needing to set up more conflict for Roose and Ramsay, as we obviously know that Ramsay ends up killing his father in the next episode, where Roose is like, Sansa Stark, she's the key to the North, and without her, let's hope that my wife bears a boy in my name.
Yeah, that line is like that's Roose's like fatal flaw here. He's like, well, now that you lost Sansa, you better hope my wife has a son, because that's how they'll keep the North.
That that's another moment of like what you like to call son stupidity syndrome, where it's like, does he not realize who his son is? He should be terrified of this guy. Like the fact that he still thinks he has any control over Ramsay is laughable.
Yeah, I feel like Roose, should. His house is of the flaying man, like shouldn't Roose be as deadly as cunning?
Right.
Like Ramsay kind of, obviously we'll talk about it when it happens. But the fact is Ramsay sort of one-ups him and Roose is not even like defending himself.
Yeah.
It would be different if Roose sort of, expected Ramsay to make a move and then Ramsay knew that he knew, so Ramsay set something up, like some sort of game of wits happening between them. But more or less the way I remember it is Ramsay just says, you know what, Pops, I'm taking over.
Yeah.
And, and basically that was it.
Well, I mean, that is essentially what happens, but it's like he's waiting for like the impetus of it's like, oh no, for the baby boy to be born. But I guess now the idea is that because he doesn't have Sansa, his position is not as secure as it was last season, which if that's the case, okay, I definitely missed that on like my repeated viewings. The other thing also too is because season 6 was so close to the end, I haven't binged it nearly as much as the first couple of seasons. But I'm like, even so, that's kind of a flimsy thing.
Well, I think it would have been, again, we're always fantasy booking of how this should be better, and obviously we're the audience. We don't get to make the show. We don't get to really, on the internet here have them produce the episode. But the fact is, what could have been is more like Roose takes one of his confidants aside and tells him like, oh, Ramsay's really a weak bet. I put all my eggs in that basket. I better hope that, my new wife has a son. And Ramsay could have very easily overheard it. Been, really jealous and upset.
Yeah, it makes no sense for Roose to tell him directly.
Exactly. Well, even if he tells him directly, like, it's like Roose sort of has instigated this hatred towards him. And Roose should have, some sort of knowledge that Ramsay might come at him and, not leave himself defenseless. And I think that's the way it comes across for me when Ramsay sort of takes that sudden, oh, I'm taking you out, decision. It's like Roose seems dumbfounded, but it's like obvious that you kind of goaded him and you should have been on high alert, that you should not necessarily have felt comfortable around Ramsay.
Yeah, it's a dumb move on Roose's part. And like, I'm not gonna say that Roose Bolton was always like the most focused on character, obviously, as the seasons went on after his introduction. But it's like, this is one of the dudes who engineered the downfall and death of Robb Stark, and the fact that he felt like this easily outwitted, it definitely kind of undermines his capabilities as a villain. Although, like I said, he wasn't a guy that really had that much screen time after the fact. So
I agree with that. But I think Roose is probably one of the more underrated or underutilized characters in the show. Like he could have been, obviously they wanted to focus all the violence on Ramsay and make him sort of the villain for the second half of the series, before the Night King really sort of steals that role. But, the fact is Roose should have been, just as vile and should have been, shown, maybe not as bad as Ramsay, but maybe a little formidable, so that there is a little tension leading up to when Ramsay takes him out.
100%. Yeah. Now we cut to a little bit further north of Winterfell. Theon and Sansa making their way through the woods. And I like to refer to this scene. I've been coming up with I love using the term ex machina in things because
the best Theon scene I've seen in seasons.
100%. But I like to call the scene afterwards Brienne ex machina, because you're right. It starts off great where Theon, he's finally grown a spine. He's finally actually acting like himself again. He's finally he's acting selfless. He's acting like a hero. He's on his path to redemption. Of course, it gets completely undercut once they just immediately start having him suffer from PTSD out of nowhere later on.
Well, they have him. I love how they're running through. They cross the river. He's she's like, I'll freeze to death, and he's like, no, the hounds do worse than the cold water. And
do they?
Yeah, it's basically everything's cool about this chase sequence, and then they get to the tree, right, and they're hiding under the tree, and they hear the dogs. They're still coming. They're relentless, and Theon says, you run to the north, you get to Jon. That's the best way for you. I'll distract them. And then he kind of runs out and he flags them down so that he can distract them. And Sansa just sits there.
Yeah.
I love it. She's like frozen in terror. And, I guess, I guess that's possible. You're just so scared that
Sure,
you
but
can't move.
sure.
But it's one of those things where Sansa's got to go. Like
Yeah.
stop just like sitting there or whatever. But what comes from this scene is Theon's telling all these lies, and the soldiers are just like, yeah, I don't believe
Yeah,
you.
this doesn't make
And the hounds,
the dogs are immediately like
yeah,
barking like that. That's clearly
it's
someone around
the
the
fact
corner.
that Ramsay's men basically just cut him out, don't even treat him as a threat, is like a testament to how broken Theon has been.
Yeah.
Because it's like they don't even think that he's going to pick up a sword and attack them. It's one of those things where it's like, just forget him. He's just Reek. And I will say this is like, obviously they get to Sansa. The one thing that happens here, this is where the weird teleporting begins, because the hounds just disappear from the scene.
Yeah, I did notice. Although they may have run away. They may have run away.
Well,
with
yeah,
Brienne
but
coming in, but
clearly they didn't shoot that shot.
yeah, no. But my biggest thing is like, so what, bro? So what? Brienne just happened to be riding around the forest, hoping that Sansa like escaped. Like, did she hear the barking hounds? Yeah. Like,
I still, in terms of a heroic moment,
it's awesome.
Yeah, having Brienne and even Podrick, who now knows how to sword fight,
magically
come in.
Just enough in order to hold his own against the one guy.
Yeah, well, he kills a couple, right? At least one.
He kills one, I think. Well, and he has to be saved by Theon from one.
Yeah, so listen, Brienne comes in, Podrick come in. They're basically going to town. They're beating up on Bolton's men, getting rid of them. And Theon, yeah, he picks up a sword and he finally gets a little semblance of revenge against one of Bolton's men. And so, it's a great sequence because, and listen, you have Sansa who's scared out of her mind. The day is won. Brienne goes up to her and finally, for like the 15th billionth time, pledges her allegiance to one of these two daughters of.
And hopefully, one of these allegiances will finally pan out.
Yeah, and then finally, it's like Sansa's like, "Yeah, I'll mumble the words," and Podrick has to help her a little bit.
She doesn't even know them. It's the funniest.
She knows 2 out of the 3 sentences, right? It's just that middle part that kind of got a little shady. But the fact is, it's a really touching moment. I might be joking a little bit about it, but it's really touching. Finally Brienne gets that, payoff that she's been looking for so many seasons. Sansa's finally protected, so, these two characters that we've wanted to achieve something over the course of many episodes, finally, come together and they help each other in such a way where they're able to sort of get what they want. Sansa obviously secured away from, Ramsay and never really have to feel that she's in danger of being captured again. And Brienne, who wants to, basically keep her oath to Catelyn Stark. And so this scene is sort of a, culmination of those storylines. And I think it's a really awesome payoff here in this episode.
100%. Yeah, the thing that I've said the most about season 6 is satisfying because it finally gave the good guys, quote unquote, who had just seemed to just take pummeling after pummeling after pummeling, specifically last season. It finally gave a lot of them a break. It gave Jon a victory, it gave Sansa a victory, it gave Daenerys a victory, it gave Tyrion a victory, sort of. It gave, and most of all, it gave Theon and Brienne victory as well. It just felt like every single character this season just earned a little something, just after having been consistently and continuously screwed over last season. Even the characters who we're not as big a fan of, even Cersei gets a little bit of her own this season as well, with her ultimate victory over the Sparrows. And that's probably the most satisfying thing. That's the thing that saves this sequence in particular, just given the ludicrous mechanics and logic that they have to jump through in order to get it through to there. But like I said, it's getting back to kind of those moments and those payoffs that we've been waiting to be paid off for a while now. And that's what ultimately made it so satisfying. Now we cut to King's Landing. And this is a brief moment. Again, King's Landing is very, very sporadic this season until they ultimately big up to the big boom, quite literally at the end. Cersei is in the castle awaiting Myrcella's return. Marjorie is still very much in prison. They're trying to plan out their next move against the Sparrows and figuring out. And of course, I think that ultimately the thing that really redeemed Myrcella's death after it kind of came out of nowhere last episode. Like I said, the scene itself was great. The death itself, it's like, really, you could have gotten around that. But like Lena Headey's performance in this scene, like carries this entire scene as far as just like her reaction, because it's the first time that in a long, long time that we've seen like Cersei, like the human side of Cersei, for lack of a better word. I feel like the last time that we saw this was in the 5th episode of season 4, if I'm not mistaken, when she was having that conversation with Oberyn about Myrcella, and you could just hear this like just tender nature and this tender side of Cersei that you had never seen before. And the fact that like this is one of the only 3 people on the planet who she had ever really truly cared about, and the fact that now 2 out of her 3 children are gone and dead, and this is one of the few that is one of the 2 that didn't deserve it ultimately, and she just dispels all this pain, all this anger, validates Jaime for everything. She's like, yeah, all my dumb decisions that I made last season, now this is me suffering for them.
I love the dialogue here too, because she's talking about prophecies and this is what was foretold, and this is what I guess we're basically having to deal with. Everything's being taken from us, and it's destiny. And then Jaime, comes up and says, no, it's still us against the world. Like, we're going to fight back, and they're going to pay 10 times what have been taken from us. And so it definitely shows you the different headspace that the 2 characters are in. Cersei, everything's kind of falling apart. It's things are just going bad. She's doubting herself, and she's sort of in this negative headspace. And Jaime here is sort of still relying on sort of, I guess, the old thinking where it's like, it's just the 2 of us. Let's go rule this world. And, I think, obviously in this moment, this is the closest that they'll be, on the same page. But I think from this point until, when they reunite in season 8, they're going to be on, differing paths.
100%. Like I said, because it's the most vulnerable that we see Cersei, in addition to everything that she has both wrought upon herself because of her own actions and the actions of the Sparrows in the last season, this is kind of, in a way, like it's probably the only time I feel like that we ever root for Cersei, because the only time that we ever root for and care about Cersei as a character is when we know that her motivations are for her children, and that's always what she's done everything for. But the difference is that she's doing it for like kind of like a selfless reason ultimately, and so the fact that like she's gonna find some validation for her daughter's death in her victory over her enemies, I think that's really, really well established here. And that's why I think that King's Landing, while definitely more minimalistic this season, I think is much better storyline, I will say, this season than it was the last couple of seasons, especially because of all the storylines. It's probably got like one of the most satisfying things up there, obviously, with the dragon victory in Meereen, and then obviously the Battle of the Bastards.
Like, one of the small scenes that happens in this episode is the High Sparrow
with Marjorie.
Basically seeing Marjorie, and I know you glossed over it, but like it's one of those scenes that I watched it yesterday, and I was just like, man, what is this scene doing here? Why are we even seeing it? And it's sort of the beginning of this season's arc where High Sparrow uses Marjorie to get the Tomlin because now Cersei's free and in the Red Keep. So you get to see the High Sparrow in this season start sort of playing the Game of Thrones
finally
in his own way. Not that he's necessarily going to be the one sitting on the throne, but he's trying to maneuver himself to be really the power behind the throne, and use basically take advantage of Tomlin and Marjorie as well, because Marjorie, right, that was her whole gimmick, was to control Tomlin. But now the High Sparrow is basically hijacking that, and it's basically taking the Tyrells under his sort of wing.
Right, at least Marjorie, because as we know, Olenna is unaware of this plan for a majority of the season, and ultimately, we'll debate it once we get to the finale whether or not that was a good idea, as far as whether Marjorie should have clued Olenna in or not on the plan, and whether that really would have made any difference ultimately at the end of the day, especially given what Cersei was able to pull over everyone. But yeah, you're right, because at the end of the day, I think that Marjorie, because of because of how it seemed like Cersei had finally achieved victory over her, and ultimately because of where the Tyrell storyline ultimately ends this season, very tragically. Marjorie's kind of an underrated power player this season, because you're right. Like, again, the plot mechanics, like kind of the plotting in King's Landing kind of comes back a little bit this season, where you're right. The High Sparrow knows that with Cersei out and about again, he's definitely going to have a fight on his hands, just given everything that he's done to her. So he knows that he needs an out, and he's kind of maneuvering to control Tommen through Marjorie, and ultimately how Marjorie thinks that she can end up using that to benefiting her is I think really, really well thought out, and it's a really well set up this season. Now, we unfortunately got to get through, to me, the 2 weak spots of the season. First, Meereen, oh my God, can we just leave this stupid city behind? I think that was probably that was the one point that I forgot to bring up on our last episode in our season 5 finale. Is Daario was talking all about, the people of Meereen, At this point, I'm like, who gives a shit about Meereen? I'm sorry. What is the point of this stupid city? I get it. She wanted to learn how to rule.
Wow.
She tried. She failed. Move on. Like, the fact that they are still trying to put this much effort into this stupid city, I'm like, come on. Like,
I think it's driving you to swearing, man. Like,
it really is.
You hate this storyline that much.
So much. And I'll tell you why.
Expletive on me.
It would have been one thing, right? With the setup, right? We already know season 5 was the setup, and it was very, very poor setup at that. But the fact that of all the pay, like we said, season 6 is the payoff season, right? We always talk about that. The even seasons are the payoffs to the odd season, which is the setup season, right? Season 5 was the weakest of the setup seasons since season 1, which, as we know, was a pilot season. But season 6, this is the payoff season, right? And for the most part, all the payoffs this season hit, with the exception, in my mind, of Tyrion and Meereen and Arya and Bravos. Those are the two that just fizzle out, and I'm like, what they're trying to do here do not work. The biggest reason for me, that is because they should have all of the check marks here. This is literally just rinse and repeat of Tyrion in season 2 when he was ruling in King's Landing. He's been given a chance to rule again. He's got Varys by his side once again. He ultimately has to turn an impossible, war-torn, miserable city into, not a thriving paradise, but he has to have some form of return of peace there. He seems to have his work cut out for him. And what ultimately comes of it? He's fooled by some slavers, and one of the most obvious reveals ever, when Varys has to use his little birds to find out that, shocker, the slavers from the other cities are funding the Sons of the Harpy, and then when he tries to make peace with them, is Bagoy once again shocked again when they turn on them and immediately start to attack Meereen. It's like, what is going on? It's just like, this to me, my problem here is, it's like, this to me is the culmination of my problems with Tyrion's arc and where they go, because Tyrion once again just becomes a moron out of nowhere. And this is Tyrion Lannister we're talking about.
Listen, I think the Meereen storyline is just, we talk about how the writing is very intricate and they spend the right amount of time in the first few seasons. Now everything is streamlined, and that's what the Meereen storyline is. It's just, we get glimpses of the storyline. We don't really develop the slavers as characters. We don't develop the Sons of the Harpies as character. We don't develop even the freed slaves or Meereen as characters.
Right.
It's really just, Tyrion and Varys walking around and weird things, observing weird things, seeing weird writing on the wall.
Right. Tyrion
he releases dragons.
Tyrion trying to offer a coin to a mom and speaking bad Valyrian when it was shown that he could speak Valyrian pretty well in the last episode. It's like,
so his Valyrian's not perfect. I'm okay with that, but what does that scene actually develop in terms of the characters? Like, does she go around the corner and be like, this guy might actually be someone we can trust, and some group, decides to approach him in the future episode, and like give him information, what's going on here? What, we talk about playing the Game of Thrones, but, Meereen's an ancient city with a throne of its own.
Right.
Why is there no game being played there between the different factions? And it's because time, right? They don't have all the time in the world to spend in Meereen and show us these intricate storylines. And, I think that's where it falls flat, is we don't really get any development. We just have to go on this roller coaster of, like, some scenes, good things are going to happen to Varys and Tyrion. A lot of scenes, things are going to happen that are bad. And the fact is, we don't spend enough time to really develop and make sure that these land. And so sometimes Tyrion's got to take it on the chin and look a little dumber than his character has been built up to be, just because there's not enough time to flesh things out.
I think an easy fix for this storyline, like you said, we were doing fantasy booking. I think that an easy fix for this storyline, if they had literally just done what they did in the books, except character swaps or Barristan for Tyrion, and just have Meereen be under active siege. Forget this stupidity of trying to figure out who's funding the Sons of the Harpy or anything like that. Because if I'm not mistaken, we haven't had that happen yet, where we've seen like a prolonged siege of a landing. If anything, we've only seen that in like brief glimpses of obviously brief glimpses during the one-off battle episodes, obviously. But I think it would have been really fascinating if, right as Jorah and Daario leave, how awesome would it have been if Tyrion and Varys walk out and they see all the ships from Yunkai and Meereen who have all come because they know the Dragon Pit attack worked. Daenerys and effectively has been driven from the city. The dragons have been slaughtered. Now is the time to strike. And I think it would have been so much more fascinating. It would have added so much tension to that storyline if Tyrion and Varys are under the gun to both try and protect the city, stop the city from destroying each other while also trying to protect the city during an active siege, trying to maintain control of the Unsullied, who, like you, as has been established last season, can't do shit against the Sons of the Harpy. The Sons of the Harpy are still carrying out attacks whenever they can, and they're also hoping against hope that Jorah and Daario can get Daenerys back, who, as they know, is the key to the whole thing. I think if you do that and you take that siege that happened in like the last couple episodes of the city and you drag that situation out throughout that whole season, I think that infinitely fixes this storyline, like, instantly.
Yeah, and I think like the ships burning could be, saved for a later time. Could be the beginning
for it, exactly. Like, yeah, but also it's like knowing.
Well, if they're under siege, right, the ships are not going to really be able to leave port necessarily. But like that could be like what's allowing them to be there. And then later on, the ships burn. It's like, oh my God, we might have to surrender the city, right. And that's when Daenerys comes back with the ultimate plan.
And the key who knows? Too is you only do it every couple episodes. Like if I'm not mistaken, I gotta check, but because it's Dinklage and because he's one of the most likable characters, they gotta put that storyline in every single episode. And it's like it just becomes exhausting after a while, and it becomes very apparent that they are literally spinning their wheels until Daenerys can get back. And it's like, meanwhile, it's like you do it every couple episodes, Tyrion meets in order to barter with the slavers, the slavers, they don't like his demands at first. Then gradually he warms up to them, but this could cause some tension with Melisandre and Grey Worm because they're not a fan of how Tyrion is warming up to the slavers because of how the previous treatment happens, Then obviously the slavers backstab on Tyrion. Tyrion realizes he was wrong, Sons of the Harpy are still pushing out. Like, all the seeds are there for them to do it. And then literally, right as all hope seems lost, that's when Daenerys comes in with the dragons and boom, roasts all the slavers, and it's over with, like, that quickly. Like, that to me, like, I don't think I've ever seen a more obvious, easy fix for a storyline that is completely missed.
Listen, the Meereen storyline is, really, it's just happening, it's not really the bread and butter of the show for this season. They're gonna have it there. It's we're gonna see it, like you say, almost every episode, and we're going to sort of just get through the storyline.
Yeah, I'm gonna say it right now. I know this is a controversial take because I know that not a lot of people think this way, but for me, the Meereen storyline of season 6 is the Dorne of this season. Like, it's just an absolute chore to get through.
Yeah, listen, I'm not exactly the happiest with it. It's we'll see as we go through. There might be a good scene here, a good scene there. But for the most part, I agree with you. It's sort of, it's on autopilot. It doesn't feel like too many big surprises are going to come from it. Obviously, I think the payoff at the very end when Daenerys sort of gets her way, and she kind of grows. She shows herself to be sort of a ruthless, warlord, I guess, at that point, that she can make these decisions on her own without her counsel deciding every move. So there is character growth, I think, by the end of this season. But, it's one of those things where, Tyrion and Varys are just sort of waiting for her to figure out her stuff, in the meantime. So, it doesn't make for the greatest plot line. It's just kind of there in the background and it serves it serves its purpose.
I'm sorry, but I don't want to be I don't. I'll add one more thing to this before we move on. But like, how awesome would it have been to have a scene with Tyrion having to rally together the Unsullied and a horde of troops because it's their last stand, because they have no other choice. They are literally going to die anyway, so they may as well die in combat, and they have to lead this force of slaves this entire city against the slave forces in a force where they know they're badly outnumbered. They have no chance of winning at all, but they're at least going to die. How awesome would it have been a callback to season 2, where season 2, you had Tyrion leading a force that absolutely despised him, but whose respect he earned. And then here, you have another force that does not know him out at all and has no reason to trust him as an outsider. And instead, he's able to gain their trust through his complete and pure intelligence and lead them and at least have them hold their own in a battle against like that. I'm sorry, like I usually leave the fantasy book to you, but like the fact that I'm spinning a better storyline for this season, it's just
listen,
me guys.
Listen, the show's over, so if you're listening to this podcast,
everyone calls for
you should have watched it 2-3 times by now.
Right.
But the fact is, I think this could have been, as you say, definitely a direction they could have taken. They could have done the callbacks to Blackwater, and I would have been eating that up with you. I think I would enjoy.
Like, that sounds
that
awesome.
Type of
that is something I'm like, yes, that's the Tyrion I remember. And what a great redemption arc that would have been for him, too. And what a great way to solidify his arc with Daenerys so that he's 100% on board with her, where she literally comes in and saves him, and he sees the full force of the dragons, and he sees what they can do, and it's both terrifying and awesome at the same time. And think about how heartbroken that would make him when he sees that same dragon fire being used in the destruction of King's Landing. That season obviously being what it was. I digress. I'm sorry. I got to stop.
I think what we're, basically, our kind of like digging deep into these storylines is because we want more. We want sort of the novel-esque details that, the source material kind of can give this show. And obviously it's a TV show. A lot of things have to be streamlined. They only have, 50 to 60 minutes per episode in the most cases to get through the storylines. They have so many characters. They're so spread out that they got to be economical with their scenes. So I understand the mechanics of making a TV show, but I think every time that we go on this booking rampage of like how things could have been different, the core is we want just more substance, more details, more setup. We want, things that, you would get if you were sort of reading a novel, just because the world is so rich. And I feel like the TV shows, when it streamlines some of these things and it doesn't really make it feel like it's a rich storyline, that's when we feel unsatisfied.
100%. Yeah. And there's another instance in which we feel unsatisfied. Again, Arya just getting the shit beat out of her in Bravos for no reason. Like, this is the moment. Like, here's the thing, because the thing about the waif in season 5 is the waif was established as like potentially just being, like the yang to Jaqen's yin, where, you have these two different faceless men figures. It's kind of weird that they're the only two faceless men figures, but I digress. Where Jaqen is the one that kind of trusts and has faith in Arya that she'll be a good addition to the faceless men. And the waif was always like, she's too attached to her homeland. She's not really ready for any of this, And now you have the waif has been validated by Arya's deeds at the end of season 5, but now you just have her coming out and just being a bully to Arya. I'm like, is this supposed to be more like the mental manipulation that Jaqen was doing with the whole faceless trick at the end of last season when she went blind? Or like, what's going on here?
The scene's really weird. It's like, are you listening to them? They're talking about you.
And I love how too everybody just passes by as this one random blind girl is just getting beat up by this one girl with a stick. She's clearly blind.
I almost wanted I almost wanted someone to, like, at the beginning of the scene, be like, "Oh my god, you must have ate too many of the seafood. You got poisoning. You're blind."
Poisoning. Just bring it back to the oyster clubs, cockles, and clam spit. It's like, man,
I'm sorry. I guess I'm just traumatized by that. But the fact is, this scene is, we know that she lost her sight. They show her in sort of dire straits, and then the waif is there saying, like, it's almost like your training's not complete. Like, we're not going to leave you for dead. And like, stand up and fight.
You got a little bit of a harder track now, but like, we're
exactly
still willing to lend you an ear.
So I understand like where this storyline's going. It's very quick. It's very easy. It's again, it seems kind of random that they're just like fighting in the middle of the street and everybody's like, just sort of like eating popcorn and watching. Like no one's questioning this. No one's whatever. It's kind of an odd scene, but I get where it's going. It kind of sets things up for this season, and it's quick, it's easy. You don't really have to think about it in this episode. I kind of wish that we got a little more, into it, but it's fine. We just don't really have the time in this episode to go into it. So they just sort of let you know that Arya is still around. She's still blind, still dealing with the waif. And that's all we need to know in this episode. And so we'll see as the season progresses, like where this storyline takes us. But here in the first episode, it's just a reminder that the state she's in.
100%. 100%. Yeah. And if anything, you could see that the waif's abuse could factor into Arya's decision to go back to Westeros. It's like, man, I was going to dedicate my life to you people. You people lie me and beat me up with sticks. Fuck that. I am going to go back to my family and go back to killing people on my list,
Yeah.
But so anyways.
Kind of a blunt way of looking at it.
A little bit. Sure. But I mean, hey, let's wrap this story. Let's wrap this episode up. Like I said, this is a gangbusters premiere, but let's wrap it up with, again, Daenerys. So interesting thing about this storyline, right? The Daenerys storyline in this season, like I said, it's a little bit weighed down ultimately by the Meereen arc and the fact that it is ultimately kind of constrained by, okay, they're supposed to be under a timetable where they have to get Daenerys back to Meereen, but we obviously know about all the stupidity that's happening in Meereen. Once again, this is another storyline that, while it is good on paper, it lacks urgency and kind of just goes magically in the character's direction when it needs to. But I will say that the setup for it in this episode, at least, is still pretty good. I like the idea of Daenerys being back with the Dothraki, the fact of
that's all cool.
Yeah, like the progression of where she's coming, just seeing like how much she's learned, that's so fascinating seeing her, where it's like, wow, this is literally a mirror image, and you have these young Dothraki soldiers who, for all we know, may have been just like up and coming Dothraki soldiers when the last time that she was with the Khalasar, who knows how long that's been, and her just like kind of having this knowledge of them, and now how she's able to use that to her advantage, obviously when she's brought before the Khal. Good stuff.
Can I just say, like, this sequence, I want to love it. But there's one fatal flaw is, when the Khal is basically threatening to, take her to bed and have her with this child, she goes, "Don't touch me. I'm, the mother of dragons."
Right.
Whatever.
Well, first she says the thing. First she says the thing that Meereen Mazdura told her. It's like, she's like when the sun rises in the west and sets in the east, or something like that.
She goes through all her titles, including "I am the great Khaleesi," blah 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 blah.
Yeah.
They kind of ignore her, and then like 4 or 5 sentences later,
she says that she was widowed to Khal Drogo.
Yeah, and it's like,
which should have been the thing that she led with.
Yeah, but what do you think? Like, when she's giving her titles and she says, "I'm a Khaleesi," what were they thinking? Like, that didn't spark a second. Like, you're lying to us, or
known to be super intelligent. I will say that, but yeah, you're right. That is a little bit of a flaw.
It's a little bit of a, to me, it's kind of an oversight. Like, she should be giving her titles, and before she gets to the Khaleesi bit, they stop her. You know what I mean? She has to struggle to get that part out, because that's what's going to save her life. But I other than that kind of took me out of the scene. Is just like, well, she just told them that she was a Khaleesi,
right?
And then
could have been a simple thing of where just a little bit of a line switch, like if she leads off.
Yeah, it's a minor thing,
right? It is a minor thing. Like if she leads off with, "Oh, I was widowed to Drogo," and then drops the titles, then okay, and like you see the realization on his face.
I think it's more for me being taken out of it because I feel like they would have gotten a reaction once she said the title, but they don't. They kind of just like listen to her, and then 5 sentences later she says, "Oh, Drogo," and then they're like, "Oh my God, this is very important." So it just took me out of the sequence. Other than that, I thought it was a great scene. It's like you have his wives there saying that she's a witch and she's crazy, and there's a little banter going on throughout the sequence. He is kind of a threat to Daenerys, and I think that's good. That he obviously has like a one-track mind, and that's to add her to his group of wives. And it's obviously we don't want to, viewers and Daenerys don't want her to go back to just being in that position of being a slave to someone in the Khalasar. So the fact is, it kind of creates this tension of like, how is she going to get out of this? And I think it's like you said, it shows her growth, her knowledge, and how she's able to sort of handle it. And
kind of reminds you, oh yeah, she is a competent leader, as much as last season tried to make you think that she wasn't.
Yeah. So, I'm all for that. And I think it's a really good scene. just a little bit of wordplay takes me out of it a little bit. But other than that, I kind of like the scene. I kind of like how it's like we're going to introduce you to this, retirement home for widows, I guess.
I love the concept where it's like just a bunch of like this essentially like giant cottage in Vice Dothraki where it's just like all these Dothraki widows,
Yeah, so you're setting up this storyline. We don't know what it is. It's a mystery. Daenerys is obviously, going down this path. It's sort of like, will Jorah and Daario get there in time?
Get there in time.
That's sort of the setup, right? And, by the time they get there, obviously we've seen the show, but Daenerys figures it out for herself. She doesn't need no man to come rescue her.
Yeah, that's another thing that starts this season that we'll get into at a later point.
Yeah, so I think as we see that unfold, it just shows you how strong her character has become. There's a couple questions about the Dothraki in general that this storyline brings up, but again, it's kind of like the best way I can put it is it's like a low hanging fruit victory for Daenerys. She just needs to grab that cavalry before she gets ready to go to Westeros. So
yes, 100%.
It's a very easy way for her to wrap up the Dothraki storyline and get them under her command.
Yeah, exactly. That's kind of like the way that I summed it up too, is that even though the inception of the storyline is really awesome at its core, right? And I like I said, the storyline lacks a sense of urgency, and with how it results, like I said, it's compounded and weighed down by the problems with the actual what's happening in Meereen. But ultimately, all it really contributes to her arc is, so this is just how she gets the Dothraki back in her control. Which it's like, okay, like you feel like you could have saved a lot of time there if that was the case. But despite our complaints, I still think this was a much more satisfying premiere than last season. Although last season had a good premiere from what I remember, but it definitely seems like it's shaping us up for a great season going forward. Like I said, we still have so much more to get into. We still have all of Bran's storyline to get into. We have all the setup for the Battle of the Bastards, all the secondary stuff that's going to come in, the reintroduction of the Northern houses, all the returning characters that we haven't seen in a couple seasons. Obviously, we get the Blackfish back this season. We get the Hound back this season. We get oh my God, so many different characters that we get back. The Brotherhood Without Banners, we get back this season. Walder Frey, we get back this season. All these old Game of Thrones legacy characters, we get back this season. Osha and Rickon, obviously, we know we're coming back in a couple of episodes. And we're going to be covering all of that and more. It's going to be certainly an interesting season to cover. You guys are not going to want to miss this. Once again, new episodes are uploaded every single Friday on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. We have, like I said, only 22 more episodes of the entire show. So if you want to go back and listen to the entire back catalog of Talkin Thrones, it is all available entirely on Spotify. Pat, where can the good people follow you on the interwebs?
Hey, listen, I'm on Instagram at Patrick W. Huber. I post things here and there. I post me barbecuing the other day. That was, like a week or two ago from this recording. So, slowly every once in a while, I just post things. Really on my personal account, I'm just kind of getting used to sharing things and doing random things. So, hey, it's either going to be backyard barbecuing or filmmaking. So one of the two. Man.
Whatever the case is, I'm down for it. Make sure you go follow him. Follow myself at Movie Nerd Reviews across all platforms. Be sure to follow the official Talkin TV podcast across all platforms, especially on TikTok. Be sure to follow us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and Twitch if you're not already following us there. Subscribe to us on YouTube. And as always, people, 12 seasons in a short film and watch more fucking movies. We'll see you guys next time.